A colossal human figure stares from a Chilean hillside, visible from orbit. This is the power of the mountain removal technique, a deliberate act of geological artistry that challenges everything we assume about ancient times. By the end of this, you will understand exactly how cultures with basic tools performed what looks like an impossible feat of earth moving. We will uncover how they planned images kilometers long without modern technology, and why they invested such staggering effort into marks only fully seen from the sky. What does it say about us that our ancestors felt compelled to write their beliefs directly onto the planet itself? These lines in Peru stretch for kilometers across a stark, high desert plateau. From the ground, you see only shallow trenches, pathways of cleared stone cutting through the rusty gravel, but ascend above them, and the abstraction resolves into perfect geometry. A hummingbird with a needle-like beak, a spider with legs elegantly curved, a monkey with a spiraling tail. These are geoglyphs, the largest drawings humanity has ever made. A geoglyph is any large-scale design created directly upon the landscape, not by adding pigment to a surface, but by altering the surface itself. This is art not painted on the earth, but sculpted from it. The artists might carefully remove a layer of dark, oxidized stones to reveal a lighter, sandy soil beneath, creating a stark contrast. Or they might meticulously gather stones into lines and shapes, building the image up rather than carving it down. The common thread is monumental scale. These are not intimate carvings to be examined at arm's length. They are vast compositions whose true form only emerges when viewed from a great distance, often from the air itself. From England's rolling chalk hills, the Uffington White Horse, a stylized creature over 100 meters long, has galloped for possibly 3,000 years, its form maintained by generations clearing vegetation from its trenches. In the California desert, the blithe intaglios depict human figures and animals so massive that their outlines were not recognized until a pilot flew over in the 1930s. Each of these works transforms a hillside or a valley floor into a colossal canvas. But this is just the foundation. To grasp the ultimate ambition of this art form, we must move beyond lines on a plane. We must look to the mountainsides where ancient artists did not simply draw on the land. They began to remove the land itself, piece by piece, to create images that seem to emerge from the very bones of the earth. The difference between a simple drawing and a mountain removal is the difference between a molehill and a mountain itself. Think of a modern quarry, a site of organized chaos where diesel-powered giants claw and grind at the earth, moving hundreds of tons of material in a single day. Now erase those machines from the picture. Replace them with teams of people using nothing more than woven baskets, wooden levers, and stone or copper tools. The objective is no longer to extract valuable ore, but to meticulously peel back the skin of the landscape itself, removing layer after layer of dark surface stones and packed earth to reveal a lighter-colored stratum beneath. This is the mountain removal technique in its purest form. It is a subtractive art on a geological scale. The artists were not building up, but carefully taking away, sculpting the mountain's face to create a negative image that would last for millennia. The logistical challenge is almost incomprehensible. We are not talking about moving a few piles of dirt. For the largest geoglyphs, we are discussing the displacement of thousands upon thousands of tons of material. To make this tangible, let's put some numbers to the wonder. Take the famous Nazca monkey geoglyph in Peru. From a satellite, it appears as a graceful, looping figure. But on the ground, its single, continuous outline is a trench roughly 30 centimeters deep and up to a meter wide, tracing a path over 135 meters long. Simple math on the volume of that trench reveals that its creation required the careful removal and relocation of well over 1,000 tons of rock and soil. That is the equivalent of filling more than 100 large dump trucks to the brim, all moved by hand, one basket at a time. Now, expand that thought to the entirety of the Nazca Lines, with their hundreds of individual figures and miles of straight lines. The total volume of material moved escalates into the tens of thousands of tons, a collective effort that represents a staggering investment of human labor and community will. This scale forces a single, pressing question to the forefront of our minds. How on earth did they do it? The answer lies not in lost technology or alien intervention, but in a profound understanding of their environment and a brilliantly simple system of organization that turned an impossible task into a managed generational project. The true genius of these artists was not in their strength, but in their observation. Before the first stone was ever moved, the most critical step had already been taken. It was the selection of the perfect canvas. This was not a random act of marking any available hillside. It was a deliberate, strategic choice rooted in a deep, generational understanding of the land itself. These ancient engineers possessed a form of geological wisdom we are only now learning to decode. They sought out specific, stable slopes with a particular geological personality. The ideal canvas had two distinct layers. On top, a thin, dark blanket of desert pavement stones darkened over centuries by a natural varnish of manganese and iron oxides, a process we call desert varnish. Beneath that dark veneer lay a much lighter stratum, often a pale, compacted subsoil or even the bright bedrock itself. The artistic process, then, was elegantly simple in concept. By carefully removing that dark top layer, they would expose the bright layer underneath, creating a high-contrast image that could last for millennia. They were not painting with pigment. They were revealing a picture that was already waiting beneath the surface, using the mountain's own natural palette. But the wisdom went far beyond just finding contrast. They chose slopes with a gentle, consistent angle, stable enough to resist catastrophic landslides, yet tilted just enough so that rainwater and wind would naturally clean the design rather than bury it. They avoided areas with deep, loose soil that would shift and blur their lines. Instead, they favored surfaces where the dark stones sat directly on a firm, packed underlayer, allowing for clean, crisp removal. This choice of location was a masterstroke of what we might call passive engineering. By leveraging the natural properties of the site, they dramatically reduced the labor required. They didn't have to fight the mountain. They collaborated with it, using its own structure to their advantage. Think of it like finding the perfect piece of wood for a carving. A master woodcarver doesn't just grab any log. They select a piece with the right grain, the right hardness, free of knots that could spoil the design. The ancient geoglyph makers were doing the same, but on a landscape scale. Their deep environmental understanding, born from countless seasons of living within that terrain, allowed them to see potential where we might only see barren rock. This profound connection to their environment ensured their messages would endure, whispering across the centuries not in spite of the elements, but because of them. With the perfect canvas selected, the next challenge was one of staggering precision. How do you take a design from a palm-sized sketch and faithfully reproduce it across the face of a mountain, ensuring a hummingbird's wing curves just so over a distance longer than 3 football fields? This was the master plan, and it relied not on magic, but on a system of layout and scaling so ingenious it turns the entire landscape into a drafting tool. The process likely began small. Archaeologists theorize that artists first created a scaled model, perhaps drawn on a manageable patch of ground or even on a portable textile. This model served as the original reference, the seed from which the giant would grow. To transfer this design, they may have employed a method as simple as it is clever, the grid system. Imagine drawing a grid of squares over the small model. Then, on the mountainside, they would establish a much larger grid using ropes and stakes, with each square representing a massively enlarged version of the one on the model. A person standing in a single large square on the hill would only need to replicate the tiny segment of the design contained in the corresponding small square on the model. This breaks an impossibly complex task into thousands of simple, manageable actions. One team works on the curve of the beak here, another on the straight line of a leg there, all guided by the local reference of their grid square. But how do you create a perfectly straight line that runs dead true for over a kilometer across rough desert terrain? The answer may lie in the simplest of tools, a cord and a series of stakes. By lining up 3 stakes in a straight row, a technique known as ranging, you can extend a perfectly straight line indefinitely, correcting for the dips and rises of the land. For curves and complex shapes, a central stake with a long, fixed rope could act as a giant compass. A person holding the taut rope would walk a perfect circle, while others following behind would mark the path by clearing stones along that arc. This transforms the mountain into a giant geometric instrument. There is also compelling evidence that astronomy played a crucial role in this grand layout. Many of the long, arrow-straight Nazca lines point directly toward the position of the sun during solstices or to important stars on the horizon. The landscape itself became a colossal calendar or celestial map, aligned with the cycles that govern planting, harvest, and ceremony. This systematic, almost mathematical approach was the silent blueprint. It was the shared knowledge that allowed a community, working perhaps over generations, to act as a single artist. Every basket of stones removed, every trench deepened, was guided by this invisible framework, ensuring that the final image, unseen by its creators, would emerge in perfect harmony from the earth when viewed from the vantage point of the gods. The physical toolkit for reshaping a mountain was astonishingly humble. Forget lasers or advanced machinery. The true agents of this change were items you could find in any ancient household or workshop. Sharpened wooden stakes for marking lines, fibrous ropes braided from local plants for measuring and guiding, simple stone hammers for breaking up compacted gravel, and above all, countless woven baskets for carrying the earth away. This was not a failure of technology, but a triumph of technique. The core method, understood by archaeologists, is often called the gravel mulch removal process. It begins with a team using digging sticks or stone tools to loosen the dark, varnished stones that coat the desert surface. Once loosened, workers would scoop the gravel and soil into large baskets. These baskets, carried on backs or perhaps slung on poles between 2 people, were then transported to designated areas away from the emerging design, creating the low berms or piles often seen alongside the geoglyphs. The process was then repeated, layer by painstaking layer, until the lighter-colored earth beneath was fully exposed, creating that brilliant, lasting contrast. The sheer volume of material moved with such basic implements is what transforms this from a simple task into a staggering feat of endurance and coordination. Think of it as a colossal, slow-motion version of creating a garden path by hand. You clear the area, you remove the top layer, you define the edges. Now imagine that path is over a kilometer long, 30 centimeters deep, and you have to maintain its perfect curvature while working on a sloping hillside you cannot see in its entirety. The absence of complex machinery makes the accomplishment profoundly more impressive, not less. It shifts our awe from the tools to the hands that wielded them, and to the shared vision that guided thousands of those hands over countless days and seasons. This was a symphony of human effort where every basket carried was a note in a melody written across the land. Moving that many tons of earth required more than just skilled hands. It demanded a living, breathing human machine. The true wonder of these geoglyphs is not just etched into the soil, but woven into the fabric of the society that made them. This was an act of social engineering on a breathtaking scale. To carve a single figure, a community had to solve problems of logistics that would challenge a modern project manager, all without a single spreadsheet or radio. They needed a workforce potentially hundreds strong, working in coordinated teams for weeks or even months at a time. They needed to feed and shelter those workers in a remote, arid landscape. And they needed a shared purpose so powerful it would compel people to invest their sweat and days into a creation they themselves would never see in its full, majestic form. So how was this army of artists assembled and sustained? The answer lies in the powerful social bonds of the time. In many ancient Andean cultures, labor was often organized through a system of communal obligation and reciprocal exchange, known as mita. It wasn't forced servitude in a grim sense, but a rotating duty where communities contributed work for large public projects, whether building terraces for farming, maintaining irrigation canals, or, it seems, creating monumental art. In return, participants were supported by the community's collective resources and shared in the spiritual and social benefits of the completed work. This system turned an impossible individual task into a manageable communal right. The workforce itself would have been a symphony of specialized roles. First came the master planners, the individuals who understood the celestial alignments and the geometric principles, who laid out the giant grid with their ropes and stakes. Then came the excavation teams, using their digging sticks and stone tools to break the desert pavement. Following them were the transport crews, the backbone of the operation, who filled basket after basket and carried the debris to the growing spoil piles. There would have been overseers walking the lines, ensuring the trenches maintained their proper width and depth, a form of ancient quality control. And crucially, there was a vast support network operating just out of frame. People were needed to weave the countless baskets that wore out under the strain. Others were tasked with preparing food, grinding maize, drying fish, cooking in large communal pots, and hauling vital water from distant sources to the worksite. This wasn't just a group of people digging. It was a temporary, purpose-built society camped on the mountainside, every individual a crucial cog in a machine designed to converse with the heavens. The sheer non-utilitarian nature of the project is what makes it so revealing. They weren't digging for irrigation or building defensive walls. This was an investment in something intangible, identity, faith, or a legacy meant for viewers beyond the human realm. It proves these cultures possessed not just the technical skill, but the profound social cohesion and shared vision to direct immense effort toward a goal that fed the spirit rather than the stomach. This collective fingerprint is the most enduring part of the design, a testament to what people can achieve when they move together as one. This perfect marriage of method and material finds its ultimate expression on a vast, wind-scoured plain in southern Peru. The Nazca Pampa is not a mountain in the traditional sense, but a geological stage so ideally prepared it seems almost designed for this art. Imagine a tabletop 50 kilometers wide, flanked by dry hills, its surface a uniform sheet of dark, sun-baked pebbles. This is the canvas. Beneath that unbroken pavement of rust-colored stones lies a stratum of pale, creamy sand. The contrast is built in by nature itself, waiting only for a hand to reveal it. Here, the mountain removal technique transforms into something even more elegant: desert pavement removal. The artists did not need to dig deep trenches. Their task was one of meticulous curation, of selective clearing. To create the hummingbird, the spider, or the condor, teams of workers would begin by marking the immense outline, likely using the grid and chord techniques we discussed. Then, with simple tools, they would carefully loosen and lift away the dark surface stones only along the precise lines of the design. They weren't excavating soil, they were peeling back a natural rug. The removed stones were then carried off and piled along the edges of the cleared lines, forming low, dark berms that actually helped to frame the bright image, and protect it from being scoured away by the wind. This process created a shallow negative space, a trough merely 10 to 30 centimeters deep, but one that held a visual power visible from space. The precision achieved is breathtaking. Look at the Nazca hummingbird, its body over 90 meters long. One wing curves in a graceful, sweeping arc, while its long, needle-like beak points with unwavering accuracy. To maintain such fluid, consistent lines across that distance required not just planning but perpetual care. The Pampa is not a static museum. Wind constantly sweeps fine sand across its surface, threatening to fill the cleared lines and blur the designs. This reveals another layer of the story. Maintenance was a continuous, sacred duty. Generations after the initial creation would return to these lines, perhaps as part of seasonal ceremonies, to clear away the accumulated debris. They weren't just preserving art, they were reenacting a ritual, reaffirming a covenant with the landscape and the forces it represented. The Nazca Geoglyphs stand as the definitive case study because they show the technique in its purest form. A stable, flat canvas, a perfect two-tone geological palette, a subtractive process that required moving stones, not moving mountains. It was a collaboration with the desert itself, leveraging its unique properties to create messages of staggering scale and endurance, a dialogue written in light and shadow upon the earth. But the Nazca Pampa was a perfect, flat canvas. What happens when the canvas itself begins to slope, when the artists must confront the true challenge of a mountainside? Travel 600 miles south into the stark embrace of the Atacama Desert in Chile. Here, on the barren flank of Cerro Unitas, a different kind of giant stands watch. This is not a hummingbird or a spider, but a humanoid figure, a colossal being 86 meters tall carved directly into the hillside. The Atacama Giant represents the mountain removal technique evolving to meet a new terrain and fulfill a new purpose. Unlike the shallow trenches of Nazca, this figure required true sculpting of the slope itself. The artists here were not just clearing a flat surface, they were engineering a negative image on a living, angled landscape, a task that introduced a host of formidable new challenges. The first and most immediate problem was gravity. On a steep incline, every basket of dark surface stones removed risked triggering a cascade. A simple trench, if not carefully designed, could become a channel for rainwater, turning a gentle slope into a gully of erosion that would quickly obliterate the delicate image. The solution was a testament to their practical genius. Instead of digging deep, continuous lines, evidence suggests they often created the giant's form through a technique known as mosaic removal. They would clear the dark stones in a pattern of interconnected patches or dots, like a pointillist painting on a monumental scale. This created the visual impression of a solid figure when viewed from a distance, but the spaces between the cleared patches allowed water to drain and sediment to settle without forming destructive channels. It was a brilliant compromise between visual impact and geological stability. The second challenge was one of perspective. A figure drawn on flat ground distorts when viewed from the side. But the Atacama Giant was meant to be seen from the valley floor below, looking up at the hillside. This required a profound understanding of forced perspective. The creators had to distort their own design in reverse, elongating the limbs and widening the torso to compensate for the steep viewing angle, ensuring the giant would appear proportional and awe-inspiring to the people standing in its shadow. This was not just drawing, it was advanced optical engineering. The figure itself, with its rectangular head crowned with radiating lines, is widely interpreted by researchers as a representation of a powerful deity, possibly a sky god or an ancestral figure. Its placement is no accident. It dominates the view from ancient travel routes, a permanent, watchful presence overseeing a vast ceremonial landscape dotted with smaller geoglyphs. This shift from abstract line to recognizable humanoid form on a dramatic slope marks a significant adaptation. The technique was no longer just about marking celestial alignments on a plane. It was about embedding a divine guardian into the very flesh of the earth, creating a focal point for ritual and identity that was inseparable from the terrain itself. The mountain was not just a canvas here, it became the body of the god. The precision of these lines points far beyond the hillside, reaching into the heavens themselves. This celestial connection provides the most compelling answer to the question of why such immense effort was spent on precision. For many ancient cultures, the sky was not a distant void, but a living map, a clock, and a sacred text. The movements of the sun, moon, and stars dictated the rhythms of life: when to plant, when to harvest, when to celebrate, and when to honor the gods. By embedding this cosmic knowledge into the earth, they created a permanent, unshakable link between their world and the celestial order. A geoglyph could become more than an image. It could function as a colossal astronomical instrument. Imagine a long, straight line carved for miles across the desert floor. To a person standing at its beginning at dawn on the winter solstice, that line might point directly to the exact spot on the horizon where the sun first crests. On that one day of the year, the line and the sun are in perfect alignment, a moment of profound significance marked not by a fleeting shadow, but by the very land beneath their feet. This turns the landscape into a stable, eternal calendar. You don't need a written record or a complex device. You simply need to stand at the right place and watch the sky confirm its agreement with the earth. This astronomical guidance also offered a brilliantly simple method for achieving those impossibly long, straight alignments. How do you lay out a line that runs true for a kilometer? You use the horizon itself. Planners could have waited for a key celestial event, like a solstice sunrise or the setting of a particularly bright star. By placing a series of stakes along the path of that celestial body's light as it touched the horizon, they could create a perfectly aligned guide that was literally written in the stars. The excavation teams that followed would then simply clear the earth along that pre-marked celestial path, translating a moment of cosmic geometry into a permanent feature of the terrain. This fusion of art, science, and spirituality is what elevates these works from impressive engineering to profound cultural statements. They were likely ritual pathways, places where ceremonies could be performed that mirrored the heavenly cycles. Walking the line of the sun on the solstice would have been an act of cosmic participation, a way of aligning the community with the fundamental forces of creation. The geoglyph served as both the stage and the script for this ritual, a sacred diagram that ensured the harmony between the human, the earthly, and the divine. In this light, the staggering labor becomes an act of devotion, a collective prayer etched into the planet's skin, ensuring that the connection to the cosmos would endure as long as the mountains themselves. This question cuts to the very heart of the mystery. Who were these immense drawings truly for? If the full form of a geoglyph is invisible from the ground, then the most logical audience must reside somewhere above it. This has led to one of the most enduring and popular theories, the idea that these were messages or offerings directed toward celestial beings. In this view, the mountain removal technique was a form of devotional architecture, creating symbols so large and permanent that only a god looking down from the heavens could appreciate their perfection. The lines were not for human admiration, but for divine acknowledgement, a permanent prayer etched into the earth to ensure favor, rain, or cosmic order. It is a powerful and poetic idea that entire communities labored to create a billboard for the sky. Yet, this celestial audience theory is only one part of a much richer tapestry of meaning. Another compelling perspective shifts the focus from viewing to walking. This is the concept of the geoglyph as a ritual pathway. From this vantage point, the image wholeness is secondary. What matters is the physical, embodied experience of moving along its lines. Imagine a community gathering at the foot of a vast, etched figure. a ceremonial leader, perhaps adorned in symbolic regalia, begins to walk the precise outline of a spider or a hummingbird. The participants follow in a solemn, single-file procession. They cannot see the spider, but they are inside it, tracing its form with their footsteps, embodying its essence through ritual movement. The geoglyph becomes a giant, sacred labyrinth. The act of walking it is a meditative, transformative journey, a way to connect with the symbol's spiritual power from within. The durability provided by the mountain removal technique was essential here, not for visual permanence from above, but to create a permanent, unchanging stage for this generational ritual. The lines had to withstand wind and time so that every ceremony, every pilgrimage, would follow the exact same sacred geometry laid down by the ancestors. This transforms our understanding of the technique's purpose. It wasn't solely about creating a distant spectacle. It was about constructing an indestructible template for spiritual practice. The true audience, then, might have been twofold. For the community on the ground, the geoglyph offered a direct physical connection to the divine through ritual movement. For the deities above, the perfected, eternal symbol stood as a testament to that devotion. The technique served both masters, crafting a bridge between earth and sky that was meant to be traversed in spirit and honored in form, a dialogue written in stone and walked in faith. But the most profound engineering was often invisible, a silent pact with the elements. To carve a symbol meant for eternity, the builders had to outwit time itself. They weren't just fighting erosion, they were recruiting it. Every choice, from the angle of a slope to the depth of a trench, was a calculated decision for preservation. The simple act of removing dark stones did more than create contrast. It initiated a self-sustaining ecological process. The shallow depression left behind acted as a subtle trap. In the hyper-arid desert, even the faintest morning dew or rare mist would be channeled into these lines. This minuscule moisture encouraged the growth of a thin, hardy crust of microorganisms, cyanobacteria, lichens, and algae. To the untrained eye, it might look like a stain, but this biological layer, called desert varnish in its early stages, actually binds the exposed soil particles together. It creates a protective skin over the geoglyph, a living armor that shields the lighter subsurface from both wind and water erosion. The builders, through keen observation over generations, likely noticed this natural process on undisturbed rocks and realized their art could cultivate its own protection. They engineered conditions for life to take hold and guard their work. Wind, the great scourge of the desert, was also cleverly managed. The placement of the removed stones was not an afterthought. Those dark berms piled alongside the cleared lines act as miniature windbreaks. They disrupt airflow at ground level, creating zones of quieter air directly over the geoglyph itself. This causes fine, blowing sand to drop out of the windstream and settle along the berms, rather than scouring across and filling the pristine design. In essence, the spoil piles become sacrificial buffers, slowly accumulating the very sediment that would otherwise bury the image. The builders turned their biggest threat into a maintenance crew, using physics to ensure their lines stayed clean and visible. This deep environmental intelligence extended to the grandest scale, the choice of which mountain face to sculpt. In the high Andes, for instance, many geoglyphs are found on south-facing slopes. This was a deliberate defense against a destructive force we might not immediately consider: frost. In these regions, north-facing slopes receive more direct sunlight, leading to a daily cycle of thawing and freezing that shatters rock and churns soil. A south-facing slope, however, remains in more consistent shadow and cold, minimizing this destructive freeze-thaw cycle. By choosing these stable, sheltered canvases, the artists guaranteed their work would not be cracked and crumbled by the very climate they lived within. This is the ultimate sophistication of the mountain removal technique. It wasn't a brutal imposition of human will upon the landscape, it was a dialogue. The builders listened to the land, understood its rhythms and rules, and then designed their monumental art to work within that system. They created a sustainable design where the environment became an active partner in preservation, ensuring the message would endure not in spite of nature, but because of a brilliant, ancient collaboration. The silent mountains hold more than just the marks of tools, they hold echoes of stories. While archaeologists uncover the how, the deepest question of why may resonate in the very myths and oral histories passed down through generations in these regions. Direct accounts of the construction process are absent, lost to the centuries, but the cultural memory of such profound acts often finds its way into legend, transforming physical labor into mythic narrative. Across the Andes, for instance, there are widespread stories of a time when giants walked the earth. These beings, often described as immensely powerful and sometimes unruly, were said to be capable of moving mountains and reshaping valleys with their bare hands. While taken literally as tales of supernatural beings, such stories could also be a poetic encoding of a cultural memory, a remembrance of an era when collective human effort achieved works so monumental they seemed, to later generations, the product of giants. The geoglyphs themselves, those colossal figures on hillsides, could have inspired or reinforced these very legends, becoming the visible proof of the giants' supposed handiwork. This is not to say the builders were literally seen as giants, but that the scale of their achievement was so awe-inspiring it demanded an explanation of mythic proportions. The stories elevate the act from construction to creation, framing the mountain removal as a foundational event in the people's understanding of their world and their place within it. We see similar threads in traditions from other parts of the Americas. Among some native cultures of the Southwest, there are narratives of hero twins or ancestral beings who, in the time of origins, traveled the land and gave it its form, marking significant places. The immense intaglios carved into the California desert, depicting human figures and animals, could easily be interpreted by later peoples as the literal resting places or portraits of these powerful entities from the dawn of time. In this light, a geoglyph is not just a drawing, it is a sacred site, a testament to an event from the mythic past made permanently visible. These oral traditions provide a crucial layer of context that pure archaeology cannot. They suggest that for the cultures who made them, these earthworks were likely far more than astronomical markers or ritual pathways. They were chapters of a living history book written on the land itself. The act of creating them, the generations of labor, the coordinated effort was itself a mythic act, a way of physically enacting and permanently recording their most important stories and beliefs. The mountain removal technique becomes a form of storytelling so grand it uses the earth as its parchment. The narrative was not about how many baskets of stone were moved, but about how a people defined their relationship with the cosmos, their ancestors, and the very ground beneath their feet. This perspective transforms our understanding from seeing a clever engineering project to witnessing a profound statement of identity, a declaration that this land and their mark upon it was an inseparable part of who they were. This urge to transform the landscape is a signature of humanity itself, found in deserts and on chalk hills far from Peru. On a steep slope in Wiltshire, England, a different kind of giant has been galloping for centuries. The Westbury White Horse is not carved from desert pavement, but from the very bedrock of the hill. Here, the technique shifts from stone removal to chalk revelation. For over 300 years, possibly much longer, local communities have maintained this stylized equine figure by methodically cutting back encroaching grass and weeds, then packing the trenches with fresh, brilliant white chalk. This act of continual renewal is the lifeblood of the geoglyph. Unlike the static lines of Nazca, the White Horse requires a persistent, communal effort to keep its form visible against the green hillside. It is a living tradition, a pact between generations to preserve a symbol of identity that looks out over the valley. The method is different, adding material rather than solely removing it, but the core principle is identical, altering the Earth's surface to create a durable, large-scale image that binds a community to its place. Across the Atlantic, in the high plains of Bolivia, another network whispers of this universal impulse. The Atacama Lines are an astonishing, often overlooked wonder. Across an area roughly 22,000 square kilometers, an expanse larger than the state of New Jersey, thousands of perfectly straight paths are etched into the ground. These are not figurative drawings of animals, but a vast geometric web, a labyrinth of lines radiating across the desert between the snow-capped Atacama volcano and distant hills. Archaeologists believe they were created by generations of indigenous people simply walking the same routes over centuries, perhaps as part of pilgrimages or trade journeys, their footsteps gradually clearing the dark surface stones to reveal the lighter earth beneath. Here, the mountain removal technique becomes an accidental byproduct of sacred travel. The image emerges not from a single coordinated project, but from the accumulated ritual of passage, a collective memory written into the soil by countless individual journeys. When you place these sites side by side, the planned precision of Nazca, the maintained tradition of Westbury, the emergent network of Atacama, a profound pattern comes into focus. These cultures were separated by vast oceans and millennia, with no possible contact or shared blueprint. Yet, driven by their own unique spiritual needs and environmental challenges, they each arrived at a remarkably similar conclusion. To make a permanent statement, you must work with the land itself. They all identified a natural canvas with a high contrast potential, whether it was dark gravel over light sand, green grass over white chalk, or stony desert over pale soil. They all developed a repeatable technique, a system of organization, to execute their vision at a scale beyond ordinary human perception. And they all channeled immense communal effort toward a goal that offered no practical, material reward. This is not a story of diffusion, of an idea traveling the globe. It is a story of convergence, of the human mind independently discovering that the most powerful way to speak to the gods, to record history, or to claim an identity was to use the planet as your parchment. The mountain removal technique, therefore, ceases to be just an ancient engineering method. It becomes a recurring chapter in a much longer story, revealing a deep-seated, almost instinctual drive within us to reshape our world in a way that outlasts a single lifetime, to inscribe our beliefs and our presence directly onto the face of the earth. This global chorus of geoglyphs asks us a compelling question. What does it say about our species that, time and again, we have felt the need to leave marks so large we cannot even see them, trusting that their meaning will endure long after we are gone? For centuries, the true nature of these immense earthworks remained a secret hidden in plain sight. Local communities in the Nazca region knew of the lines, of course, but from ground level, they appeared as nothing more than ancient trails, worn footpaths, or inexplicable clearings in the desert stone. Their breathtaking coherence as hummingbirds, spiders, and geometric shapes was utterly invisible, a masterpiece whose canvas was too vast for any human eye to comprehend. The full revelation of these designs required a technological leap that finally matched the ancient ambition of their creators, the ability to fly. The modern age of discovery for geoglyphs began not with a shovel, but with an airplane. In the 1920s and 30s, as commercial and military flights began crisscrossing the continents, pilots reported seeing strange, gigantic figures on the landscape below. What looked like random scratches from the ground resolved into perfect, intentional forms from a few thousand feet in the air. It was a perspective shift that changed archaeology forever. For the first time, scientists could see what the builders had envisioned, understanding that these were not disconnected features but unified, monumental artworks. Aerial photography became the essential tool, allowing researchers to map the full extent of these creations, and begin the painstaking work of interpretation. This technological mirror is deeply poetic. The ancient artists designed for a vantage point they could never physically achieve, trusting in a vision that only a god or a bird could see. Millennia later, humanity finally developed the means to attain that very perspective, using the airplane to complete a circle of understanding that had been left open for ages. We built wings to finally see what their minds had drawn. The revolution did not stop with the airplane. In recent decades, even more powerful tools have peeled back layers of time and terrain. Satellite imagery from orbit now allows us to survey entire regions at once, identifying potential geoglyphs in remote areas never surveyed from the air. But perhaps the most transformative tool is called LIDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. This technology, often deployed from aircraft, works by firing millions of laser pulses at the ground. By measuring how long each pulse takes to bounce back, it can create an extraordinarily detailed three-dimensional map of the surface, filtering out obstructions like trees and brush. In forested areas of the Amazon and Central America, LIDAR has revealed vast complexes of geometric earthworks, squares, circles, and avenues, completely invisible to the naked eye beneath the canopy. These are not geoglyphs in the desert sense, but they are born from the same mountain-moving impulse, and they were utterly lost until this technology saw through the veil of vegetation. On a more accessible scale, modern archaeology now employs drones equipped with high-resolution cameras and sensors. These small, agile machines can fly precise grids over a site, capturing data that lets researchers create hyper-accurate digital models. This is not just about discovery, it is about preservation. These digital twins create a permanent record of a geoglyph's exact condition, millimeter by millimeter, allowing scientists to monitor the slightest changes from erosion or human activity. They can study where patterns, water flow, and even the microscopic biological crusts that protect the lines, all without setting foot on the fragile surface. This marriage of ancient art and modern science is a partnership for the ages. The same drive that compelled people to move mountains to send a message now compels us to use lasers and drones to receive it. We are finally learning to read the full manuscript they wrote on the Earth, one pixel and one laser point at a time, fulfilling the ancient intention that these stories should never be forgotten. The sheer scale of these earthworks can feel overwhelming, almost supernatural. It is no surprise that their mystery has, in modern times, given rise to captivating stories of ancient astronauts or forgotten high technologies. The logic seems simple at first glance. How could people with simple tools possibly achieve such precision over such vast distances? Yet, when we apply the principles we have already uncovered, a far more human and remarkable story emerges, one where every so-called mystery has a grounded, ingenious explanation. The first myth to address is the idea of impossible precision. How could they create perfectly straight lines for miles without lasers or GPS? The answer is elegantly simple and requires no advanced technology, only a clear view of the horizon and an understanding of basic geometry. To lay out a dead straight line, ancient surveyors could use a method called ranging. By placing 3 stakes in the ground and sighting along them, they could ensure each new stake was perfectly aligned with the previous 2. Extending this process, a team could march a straight line across the entire desert, correcting for the curve of the Earth by simply keeping their eyes on the stakes ahead. For long-distance alignments, they used the sky itself. By marking the rising or setting point of a star or the sun on a solstice, they created a celestial benchmark, a fixed point on the horizon to aim for. This turns the entire landscape into a giant surveying instrument, using the consistent laws of astronomy as their guide. The precision was not technological, it was knowledge-based, written in the stars and executed with simple stakes and rope. Next comes the myth of impossible labor. Moving thousands of tons of earth seems to demand machinery we know they did not have, but this confuses scale with mystery. We have already seen the social engine that powered these projects, the communal labor systems that mobilized hundreds, even thousands of people. The real question is not how they moved the mountain, but how they organized the people to do it. The answer lies in social structures, not alien forklifts. In cultures across the Andes, labor for communal projects was a recognized duty, a way to contribute to the community's spiritual and physical well-being. This was not grim toil, but often a social and ceremonial act, accompanied by shared meals and a sense of shared purpose. The true technology was not a machine, but the sophisticated social contract that allowed a community to act as one. The removal technique itself was brutally straightforward. Loosen the dark stones with a digging stick, scoop them into a basket, carry the basket to a pile. Repeat this action across a grid for a season, and you have moved a mountain one basket at a time. The wonder is in the collective will, the sustained cooperation that turned a simple, repetitive action into a geological scale achievement. Finally, there is the myth of the invisible artist, the idea that the builders could not see their own work and therefore must have had guidance from above. This misunderstands the very nature of the planning process. The creators did not need to see the full hummingbird from the ground because they never intended to. They worked from a master plan, a small-scale model divided into a grid. Each worker or team was responsible for executing only the tiny section of the design within their assigned grid square on the hillside. They did not need to visualize the whole, they only needed to faithfully reproduce their small part according to the local markers and strings. The overseers, who understood the full geometric and celestial plan, ensured all the sections connected correctly. The final, majestic form was always a collective vision, held in the shared blueprint and the coordinated effort, not in any single person's field of view. It was an act of faith in the system and in each other. To attribute these works to extraterrestrials or lost super science is to miss the point entirely. It robs the real people of their ingenuity and their profound connection to their environment. The true narrative is infinitely more inspiring. It is a story of human communities observing their world with deep acuity, planning with mathematical and astronomical wisdom, and then uniting their labor toward a goal that transcended any individual lifetime. They did not have alien help, they had something far more powerful, each other, and a shared vision etched not just into the earth but into the very fabric of their society. This human-scale explanation does not diminish the geoglyphs, it elevates them, transforming them from puzzling artifacts into timeless monuments to what we can achieve through cooperation, knowledge, and perseverance. A geoglyph was never meant to be viewed in isolation, like a painting hanging alone on a wall. It was a single, powerful note in a much larger symphony of sacred space. These immense drawings were intimately connected to a ritual landscape, a network of temples, settlements, natural springs, and mountain peaks that together formed a living map of belief. The lines on the plain or the giant on the hillside did not stand apart from the community. They anchored it, physically linking the people to a geography charged with spiritual meaning. A straight line stretching from the desert floor might point directly to a temple platform on a distant hill, or to a water source considered a gift from the ancestors. This created a tangible, walkable connection between the ceremonial act and the vital resources of life. The geoglyph itself could become the starting point, the destination, or the path between these holy sites. In this way, the mountain removal technique did more than create an image. It etched the community's spiritual blueprint directly into the terrain, making faith something you could literally walk across. The creation of the geoglyph was likely a ceremonial act in itself, a ritual of making that was as important as the finished form. We can envision the process unfolding in sacred stages, each marked by its own observances. The initial selection of the site might have involved divination, seeking signs from the natural world or the stars to confirm this was the correct place to address the gods. The laying out of the first lines using those celestial alignments would have been a moment of profound significance, an act of drawing the sky down onto the earth. Then, as the communal labor began, the work itself could transform into a moving meditation. The rhythmic sound of digging sticks, the steady flow of baskets, the coordinated movement of teams along the giant grid, all of these elements could foster a collective trance state, unifying hundreds of individuals into a single purpose-driven body. The act of carrying away the dark stones might have been seen as a symbolic cleansing, removing the old to reveal a bright, new sacred reality beneath. The completion of the figure would then be celebrated with offerings, feasts, and ceremonies conducted within the very lines they had created, consecrating the space for all future use. This transforms our understanding of the labor from a construction project into a prolonged, participatory religious festival, where every basket of earth moved was a prayer made physical. Once completed, the geoglyph defined a permanent stage for the ongoing performance of culture. Those long, straight lines became sacred processional routes. We can imagine a community gathering at dawn on a solstice. Led by spiritual leaders, they would begin to walk the precise line that pointed toward the rising sun. With every step, they were not just walking across the desert, they were walking the path of the sun god, embodying the celestial journey, aligning their human rhythm with the cosmic order. The giant figure on the hillside might serve as a focal point for gatherings in the valley below, its imposing gaze overseeing dances, songs, and offerings. The geoglyph created a designated, unchanging container for these experiences. Unlike a temple that could burn or a wooden idol that could rot, this stage was the earth itself. It could host generations of ceremonies, always providing the same sacred geometry, the same alignment, the same powerful backdrop. This permanence was the ultimate gift of the mountain removal technique. It guaranteed that the rituals of the ancestors could be faithfully reenacted by their descendants, creating an unbroken chain of memory and practice tied to a place that could never be moved or forgotten. This integration of art, ritual, and landscape reveals the deepest function of these earthworks. They were tools for world-making. By carving a hummingbird into the plain or a deity into the mountain, the people were not just depicting their beliefs, they were actively constructing the reality of those beliefs. They were building a universe where the spiritual and the physical were seamlessly woven together, where a walk across the desert was a conversation with the gods, and where the very shape of the land affirmed their myths and identity. The geoglyph anchored their abstract cosmology in the solid, undeniable truth of stone and soil. It made the sacred tangible, durable, and immense. In the end, the most profound message of these lines may not be the image they form, but the simple, staggering fact of their existence, a testament to a culture that so deeply believed in its connection to the cosmos that it spent generations physically knitting that connection into the fabric of the planet. Every mark left upon the land is a conversation with its ecology. The act of moving thousands of tons of stone and soil to create these giant images was not a neutral event. It was a deliberate reshaping of the local environment with consequences that rippled through the ecosystem. When we look past the image itself to the spaces between and around it, we begin to see the geoglyph not as a solitary drawing, but as an active, engineered node within a living landscape. The most immediate change was to the land's very skin. By stripping away the dark, protective layer of desert pavement across such vast areas, the builders fundamentally altered the surface's relationship with water and wind. In a place where rain is rare but often torrential, those cleared lines and figures became new channels for water flow. What was once a uniform, pebbled surface that allowed rainwater to soak in slowly was now a network of smooth, compacted pathways. A sudden downpour would now rush along these lines, potentially carving them deeper through erosion, but also directing precious water to specific areas, perhaps toward agricultural terraces or natural catchment basins at the foot of the hills. This might not have been an accident. It could represent a form of ancient water management, where the sacred image also functioned as a subtle irrigation guide, weaving spiritual practice into the practical hydrology of survival. The piles of discarded material, the dark berms flanking the bright lines, are equally significant. These are not mere waste heaps, they are newly created landforms. They act as windbreaks, as we discussed, but they also create unique microhabitats. The spaces in the lee of these berms, sheltered from the prevailing wind, would have slightly different temperatures and moisture levels than the exposed plain. Seeds carried by the wind might find a foothold there, establishing tiny, linear oases of hardy desert plants that followed the outlines of the gods. The geoglyph, over time, could literally seed new life along its borders, becoming a faint, living outline drawn by opportunistic flora. This introduces a fascinating possibility that the long-term ecological impact was part of the design's intention. By altering drainage and creating sheltered berms, the builders were not just making a picture, they were enhancing the land's capacity to sustain life in a marginal environment. The geoglyph becomes a permanent tool for ecological engineering, a way to mark territory not just with a symbol, but by improving the very ground it occupied. The cleared areas themselves, those vast negative spaces, also had an effect. The lighter-colored subsoil exposed by the technique reflects more sunlight than the dark desert pavement. This creates a localized cooling effect, a slight but measurable change in the microclimate directly over the design. In the blistering heat of the desert, even a minor temperature difference could make a significant impact. It might have created a more tolerable path for ritual processions, or influenced where certain animals or insects congregated, further weaving the symbol into the daily rhythm of the local ecology. When we pull back to see this full picture, the relationship transforms. These cultures were not imposing themselves upon a passive wilderness. They were engaging in a sustained, reciprocal dialogue with their environment. They observed how water flowed, how stones settled, how plants grew, and then they applied that knowledge on a grand scale to create works that would, in turn, shape those very processes for centuries. The mountain removal technique was an act of profound participation. It was a way of saying, we are here, and our presence will make this place function differently. We'll make it remember us not only through our art, but through the altered flow of water, the new patterns of plants, and the changed paths of the wind. This reframes the geoglyph from a static message into a dynamic, ecological agent, a testament to a worldview that saw no separation between sacred art, community identity, and the responsible, interactive stewardship of a living world. But the experience of these sacred spaces was not silent. Recent research has uncovered a hidden layer to these landscapes, one that resonates not in the eyes but in the ears. Beyond the visual spectacle, the very act of mountain removal may have been designed to sculpt sound itself, transforming these sites into vast, open-air instruments. The cleared lines and the berms of discarded stones did more than guide the eye, they also guided the voice and the footstep. In the profound quiet of the desert, where the only sounds are the wind and the distant cry of a bird, these alterations to the terrain would have created a unique acoustic environment. A wide, smooth pathway, cleared of loose stones, would produce a distinct crunch underfoot compared to the surrounding gravel, marking a ceremonial procession with a specific auditory signature. More strikingly, the long, straight embankments flanking many lines could act as natural sound mirrors. During a ceremony, the chants of participants or the rhythmic beat of a drum might travel along these corridors, reflecting off the low walls to create focused echoes or amplifying certain frequencies. This turns the geoglyph into a resonant chamber where sound waves are channeled and shaped by the very architecture of the earth, making the human voice feel larger, more powerful, and intimately connected to the space. This sensory dimension adds incredible depth to our understanding. It suggests the builders were not just creating a visual symbol for gods in the sky, but were engineering a fully immersive environment for the community on the ground. The goal was a holistic experience. Imagine a procession at dawn. Visually, you are walking the path of the sun, tracing a line that points toward the glowing horizon. Underfoot, you feel the firm, cleared earth distinct from the rough desert, and in your ears you hear the unified chant of your community. It sounds somehow clearer, richer, and more present as it travels the sacred corridor carved from the hillside. Sight, sound, and movement fuse into a single, overwhelming act of participation. This multisensory approach makes the ritual far more potent and memorable. It engages the body and the mind on multiple levels, reinforcing the sacred message through every sense. The mountain removal technique, therefore, achieves something even more profound. It was not merely a method for making a mark, it was a technology for crafting an experience. By altering the land, they created a stage where every element, the alignment of the stars, the feel of the path, the resonance of a song, worked in concert to transport the participants, to make the abstract beliefs of their culture something they could see, hear, and walk through. This transforms the geoglyph from a distant picture into a living, sensory portal, a place where the boundary between the everyday world and the realm of the spirits grew thin, facilitated by the very sound of their own devotion echoing back from the earth they had reshaped. The images themselves are a language waiting to be translated. A spider with impossibly long, delicate legs, a hummingbird frozen mid-flight, its beak a needle pointing toward the horizon. A humanoid figure with a rectangular head and rays emanating like a crown. These are not random doodles on a planetary scale. They are a carefully curated lexicon of symbols, each shape a vessel for meaning that resonated deeply within the culture that created it. To understand why they moved mountains to draw them, we must first ask what they were trying to say. The key to this ancient code often lies not in the lines themselves, but in the other art the people left behind. By comparing the giant geoglyphs to the intricate designs woven into textiles, painted on pottery, or hammered into metalwork, a fascinating pattern emerges. The same spider appears on a ceremonial cup. The same stylized bird decorates the border of a woven mantle. This tells us the symbols were part of a shared visual language, familiar and significant in daily and sacred life. The mountain removal technique did not invent new icons. It monumentalized the most important ones, taking motifs from portable objects and etching them into the very bedrock of their world. This act of scaling up transformed a cultural symbol into a territorial and spiritual claim. A hummingbird painted on a pot might signify a family lineage or a wish for abundance. That same hummingbird, rendered 80 meters long on the desert floor, becomes a permanent declaration, a clan's identity written so large it becomes part of the landscape's identity. It is the difference between writing your name on a piece of paper and carving it into the side of a mountain. One is personal, the other is eternal, a statement meant to be seen by the gods and remembered by all who come after. Decoding begins with observation of the natural world these people knew intimately. Take the spider, a recurring figure at Nazca. One particular geoglyph is meticulously detailed, with long, curved legs and a distinctive marking on its abdomen. Researchers have noted this marking perfectly matches a spider species known for its potent venom, a spider also famous for an unusual behavior. The female is known to be highly aggressive in protecting her young. In a culture where fertility and the protection of the community were paramount, this spider could easily symbolize a powerful guardian, a fierce protector of life and lineage. Drawing it on such a scale might have been an invocation, a way to ask for that protective energy to watch over the people and their land. Similarly, the monkey, with its long, looping tail often depicted in a spiral, offers another clue. Monkeys are creatures of the dense, watered mountain forests to the east, a region that was the source of rain for the arid coastal plains where the Nazca lived. The monkey, then, could be a symbolic ambassador for water itself, its spiraling tail echoing whirlpools, streams, or perhaps even the cyclical nature of seasons and rainfall. By creating this figure, the community might have been performing a form of sympathetic magic, drawing the essence of life giving water from the mountains into their dry home through the permanence of art. The human figures, like the Atacama Giant, speak a different dialect of this symbolic language. With its rectangular, mask-like head and radiating crown, it does not depict an ordinary person. Comparisons with other Andean art and later Inca iconography suggest this is almost certainly a representation of a deity, likely a sky god or a deified ancestor. The rays emanating from its head could signify light, power, or a direct connection to celestial bodies. Its immense size and placement on a travel route transform it into a perpetual sentinel. For the people living in its shadow, the giant was not a picture of a god. It was a physical extension of that god's presence, a permanent part of the horizon that reinforced the divine order every single day. The technique of mountain removal here achieves its ultimate purpose. It doesn't just represent the sacred, it installs it directly into the geography, making faith an unavoidable feature of the landscape. Other common motifs point toward cosmic understanding. Spirals and concentric circles appear across many geoglyph sites worldwide. In the absence of written records, their meaning is interpretive, but compelling theories connect them to fundamental natural forces. A spiral could represent water, wind, or the swirling galaxy. It might depict the path of the sun, the cyclical journey of life and death, or the very vortex of creation. A simple circle could be the sun, the moon, or a sacred portal. When these shapes are connected by long, straight lines, the entire composition begins to look like a map, not of physical territory, but of spiritual and celestial relationships. The lines might trace the journey of a soul, the connection between an earthly community and a star, or the pathways deities were believed to travel. This is where the iconography transcends mere representation and becomes functional cosmology. The geoglyph system was a model of the universe as they understood it, a stable, physical diagram that explained their place within the cosmos and provided a template for rituals that maintained cosmic balance. By weaving these symbols into the earth with such deliberate, backbreaking permanence, these cultures were doing something profound. They were converting their most vital beliefs about water, fertility, protection, and the cosmos from abstract ideas into tangible, unchangeable reality. The mountain removal technique was the tool of this conversion. It allowed a story about a water-bringing monkey to become a feature of the land as real as a hill or a riverbed. It let a protective spider become part of the territory itself. This was the final, brilliant step in a process of world-making. The symbols were not just art, they were active components of a lived-in sacred ecology. To walk the line of the hummingbird was to engage with the concept of fertility. To gaze upon the giant was to stand in the presence of the divine. The message they were so desperate to preserve was not a single sentence, but an entire worldview, a complete guide to existence, its dangers, its blessings, and humanity's role within it, all rendered in a silent, monumental language of earth and stone for the ages. A hummingbird etched into a mountain requires more than faith, it requires food. The staggering labor behind these geoglyphs points to a silent, foundational truth about the society that built them. They had achieved a level of economic stability that allowed for the extraordinary. Before a single rope could be laid out or a single basket carried, the community first had to solve a far more basic equation: how to feed hundreds, perhaps thousands, of workers who were not tending fields, fishing, or herding. This monumental art was only possible because of monumental surplus. The very existence of these lines is a testament to agricultural success, to sophisticated irrigation systems in arid lands, or to robust trade networks that brought in resources from distant valleys. A society living on the razor's edge of survival simply cannot divert its energy toward moving mountains for symbolic purposes. The geoglyphs are, in effect, the physical manifestation of a thriving economy, proof that these people had mastered their environment well enough to produce more than the bare minimum for daily life. This excess created something precious: discretionary time and labor. It meant that during certain seasons, after the harvest was stored or during a lull in the agricultural cycle, a significant portion of the population could be mobilized for a communal project that fed the spirit rather than the stomach. The workforce was not comprised of slaves toiling under a whip, but likely of community members fulfilling a shared duty, supported by the collective grain stores and managed water that their own surplus had created. This seasonal rhythm of work turns the geoglyph from a sudden project into a cyclical tradition, an annual or generational gathering that coincided with times of plenty, weaving the act of creation into the very calendar of abundance. This surplus did more than just free up hands; it allowed for the development of specialized minds. The precision of these works hints at another critical economic factor: the emergence of specialized roles beyond farming. Think of the master planner, the individual who understood celestial mathematics and could translate a small sketch into a grid spanning kilometers. This person was not a part-time farmer who dabbled in geometry. They were likely a dedicated specialist, a kind of ancient engineer or astronomer whose knowledge was their contribution to society. Their expertise was cultivated and valued, supported by the community's surplus so they could focus entirely on their craft. Similarly, there may have been specialists in rope making, tool shaping, or even in organizing and feeding large work crews. This level of specialization is a hallmark of social complexity. It indicates a hierarchy of knowledge and a division of labor where not everyone needed to produce food directly, because the system produced enough to sustain thinkers, artists, and organizers. The Geoglyph project, therefore, acted as a catalyst for and a display of this social sophistication. It required the farmer, the basket weaver, the rope maker, and the astronomer to all work in concert, each supported by the economic engine that made their specialized role possible. But what compelled this investment of precious surplus into lines on the ground? The motivation was likely woven from both spiritual and social threads. One powerful model is the concept of communal labor as a form of social glue and reciprocal obligation. In many traditional societies, contributing to a grand public project was not a burden, but a right and a responsibility that reinforced one's place in the community. It built social capital. By working on the geoglyph, you were investing in a shared asset of immense spiritual value, an act that strengthened community bonds and demonstrated your commitment to the collective good. This work could have been framed as a direct offering to the gods, a tangible sacrifice of time and energy to ensure continued rains, fertility, and protection. In this sense, the economic surplus was literally converted into spiritual insurance. Another possibility involves the role of emerging leadership. Ambitious projects often consolidate power. A charismatic leader or a rising elite class might have directed this labor as a demonstration of their authority and their special connection to the divine. The geoglyph becomes a symbol of their power, funded through a form of tribute or organized labor that the community provided in exchange for security, coordination, or religious guidance. Whether driven by collective ritual or directed by nascent rulers, the economic foundation reveals a society with a clear collective will. They chose to invest their hard-won surplus not in bigger storehouses or more weapons, but in symbolic capital, in a legacy of belief made permanent. This choice is what makes these earthworks so revealing. They tell us that for these cultures, the most valuable thing they could build with their wealth was not a wall, but a message, a permanent declaration of identity and faith written in the borrowed language of the earth itself. Yet the same permanence that defied centuries of wind and sun now faces a new set of vulnerabilities born from our own modern world. The very qualities that preserved these ancient masterpieces, their remote locations and delicate surfaces, make them acutely susceptible to contemporary threats. Some damage is intentional, though often born of ignorance rather than malice. Unauthorized vehicle tracks from off-road tours or even film crews seeking dramatic footage can carve deep, irreparable scars across a fragile desert canvas in moments, cutting through ancient lines that have survived for a millennium. Thoughtless foot traffic from visitors who stray from designated paths compacts the soil and disrupts the protective microbial crusts, accelerating erosion in a single afternoon more than 100 years of desert winds might. Even graffiti, a sadly common form of vandalism, attempts to overwrite an ancient message with a modern one, violating the sacred intent of the space. Other dangers are more diffuse but equally destructive. Climate change is altering long, stable environmental patterns, bringing unexpected, intense rainfall to arid regions. Where ancient engineers carefully channeled rare water, these new deluges can now gouge out trenches and trigger mudslides that obliterate entire sections of geoglyphs in a single storm. The incremental creep of urban development and mining operations near these sites introduces vibrations, dust, and runoff that further destabilize the surrounding landscape. Perhaps the most complex challenge arises from well-intentioned but misguided efforts at reconstruction. In the past, some groups, eager to make faded lines more visible to tourists, have re-cleared or even repainted geoglyphs using modern materials and methods. This not only destroys the original archaeological record and the patina of age, but it imposes a modern aesthetic on an ancient design, effectively creating a replica that severs the direct physical link to the past. This creates a profound dilemma, as the tourism and research that bring vital awareness and funding can also be the source of harm. The footfall of 1,000 curious visitors, if not carefully managed, becomes a force of erosion. The answer, however, is not to hide these wonders away, but to manage our interaction with profound care. Modern conservation philosophy has shifted dramatically toward minimal intervention. Projects now focus on meticulous documentation using drones and three-dimensional scanning, creating perfect digital twins for study. On the ground, efforts are about stabilization, not restoration. Experts might gently reinforce a collapsing berm or install subtle, non-invasive drainage to divert floodwater, always using materials and methods that are reversible and true to the original technique. The most promising models of protection are those that reconnect the sites to living communities. Community-led stewardship programs empower local descendants and residents to become guardians of their own heritage. They serve as trained site monitors, educators for visitors, and voices in planning decisions. This approach recognizes that the deepest preservation comes from renewed cultural value, not just from fences and signs. It transforms a passive archaeological zone into an active part of a community's present-day identity and economy. The enduring challenge for our generation is to find that delicate equilibrium, allowing for respectful access and ongoing learning while prioritizing the physical integrity of these messages from the past. Our responsibility is to ensure that the staggering achievement of the mountain removal technique, a conversation between humanity and the earth, is not silenced by our own carelessness, but continues to whisper its mysteries for countless generations yet to come. Theories are only as strong as the proof behind them. How can we truly know if our ideas about ancient construction hold any weight? The answer comes not from more speculation, but from getting our hands dirty. This is the domain of experimental archaeology, a field that tests historical hypotheses by physically recreating them. It moves the discussion from the lecture hall and the satellite image directly to the desert floor, armed with replicas of ancient tools and a simple, powerful question: can we actually do it? Modern researchers have organized remarkable projects where volunteers, guided by archaeologists, attempt to recreate geoglyph segments using only the materials and methods believed to be available at the time. They fashion digging sticks from hardy local wood, they chip stone into simple hammerstones, they weave baskets from reeds and grasses. Then they set to work on a carefully chosen patch of desert, marking out a section of line and beginning the painstaking process of clearing the dark surface stones. Every action is timed, every basket load is estimated. The wear on a stone tool after hours of pounding gravel is meticulously documented. These are not reenactments for show, they are controlled scientific experiments designed to generate hard data. How many person-hours does it take to clear a 10-meter length of trench to the proper depth? How many baskets of material are moved in a day by a team of 4? How quickly does a digging stick wear down and need to be replaced? This data transforms vague admiration into quantifiable respect. The numbers that emerge are both daunting and illuminating. Experiments have shown that a small, motivated team can clear a significant area in a matter of days. The techniques work exactly as hypothesized. The dark veneer peels back to reveal a lighter layer, creating a clean, contrasting line. The real revelation, however, is in the social and physical logistics the experiments uncover. Organizing the workflow becomes a science in itself. Teams quickly learn that having dedicated stone looseners, basket fillers, and carriers creates a smooth, efficient rhythm. They discover that marking the lines clearly with string guides is essential for maintaining precision. They feel the collective fatigue that sets in by afternoon, and they understand, in their muscles and bones, why large-scale projects would have required rotating crews and communal support for food and water. This embodied knowledge is priceless. An archaeologist can theorize about labor organization, but someone who has spent a week in the sun-moving desert pavement understands it on a visceral level. The experiments also test the longevity of the results. Researchers return to their test lines year after year to observe how the cleared areas weather. Does wind-blown sand fill them in? Does the exposed subsoil harden into a durable surface? This monitoring provides crucial insights into why the original geoglyphs have survived for so long, validating the ancient builders' intuitive understanding of their environment. Perhaps the most profound outcome of these experiments is the humility they instill. When a modern volunteer, using a replica stone tool, struggles to break up a compacted layer of gravel, they gain an immediate, awe-struck appreciation for the endurance of the people who did this not for a weekend but for a lifetime. The experiment grounds our soaring theories in the gritty reality of sweat, blisters, and perseverance. It closes the gap of centuries not with imagination but with shared physical experience. We stop seeing the geoglyphs as mysterious artifacts and start seeing them as the direct products of countless ordinary days of extraordinary effort. This tangible proof does more than confirm a technique. It reanimates the human story behind the lines, allowing us to hear, across the ages, the sound of stones being lifted and the quiet determination of a people writing their faith upon the earth. The same digital tools that map these ancient lines are now creating portals to walk among them. We can step beyond photographs and satellite views into a fully realized, three-dimensional world reconstructed from millions of data points. Using photogrammetry and laser scanning, archaeologists build precise digital twins of entire geoglyph sites. These are not just pictures, they are interactive landscapes where every stone, every subtle dip in a trench is captured with millimeter accuracy. A researcher in a lab on another continent can zoom into a section of the Atacama Giant's foot, measuring erosion patterns over time without ever disturbing the fragile surface. They can simulate decades of wind and rain flow across the digital model to predict vulnerable areas, crafting conservation strategies in a virtual sandbox before a single physical intervention is needed. This digital preservation is a race against time, creating an immortal backup of a heritage that exists under constant threat from the elements and human activity. The model becomes a permanent, unchanging record, a baseline of truth against which all future change can be measured. But the magic truly unfolds when this data is unlocked for everyone. Through virtual reality, you can now put on a headset and find yourself standing in the center of the Nazca Pampa. With a gesture, you lift off the ground, soaring like a condor over the hummingbird's vast wingspan. You bank and turn, seeing the precise geometry of the spider from an angle even its creators never could. This immersive flight transforms abstract scale into visceral understanding. You feel the distance, you grasp the relationships between figures and lines in a way a flat map can never convey. It is the closest we may ever come to the perspective the builders imagined for their celestial audience. For education, this is a revolution. A classroom in a city thousands of miles from Peru can take a field trip to these sacred deserts, exploring them together in a shared virtual space. Students can kneel to examine the texture of the cleared pathways or watch an animated overlay reconstruct the step-by-step process of the mountain removal technique, seeing teams of virtual workers mark the grid, loosen stones, and carry baskets away. This layered storytelling makes the ancient effort immediate and tangible. Augmented reality adds another powerful dimension, blending the past directly onto the present. Imagine pointing your smartphone or tablet at a modern, empty hillside in Chile. Through the screen, the Atacama Giant springs to life, superimposed perfectly upon the slope, its imposing form restored to full contrast. You can walk around, seeing how the figure dominates the valley from the ancient traveler's viewpoint. This technology doesn't just show you a picture, it lets you witness the resurrection of a symbol in its true context, revealing the intentional dialogue between the art and the landscape. These tools are more than flashy gadgets, they are bridges of empathy and understanding. They democratize access, allowing people who may never afford the journey or whose mobility prevents it to experience the awe of these sites. They turn data into experience. A virtual flyover can illustrate with perfect clarity why a certain alignment points to a solstice sunrise, making an astronomical concept intuitive. We can program the virtual sky to roll back through centuries, showing exactly which stars a long, straight line targeted 2,000 years ago. This digital bridge closes a profound gap. For millennia, the full meaning of these works was locked in a perspective no human could physically attain. Now, we can finally meet the ancient artists at their intended vantage point. We can stand in the digital landscape and see what they saw in their mind's eye, completing a conversation that has been waiting silently in the stones for generations. This fusion of cutting-edge technology and ancient artistry does not replace the need to protect the physical sites, it deepens our commitment to them. By letting us walk these lines in a virtual space, we forge a personal connection that transforms distant archaeology into a shared human story, ensuring the message of the mountain removal technique continues to resonate in a new, digital age. A giant silhouette on a hillside is more than art, it is a declaration. When a community invests generations of labor to carve its emblem into the very bones of the earth, the message transcends the spiritual and enters the realm of power. This permanent alteration of the landscape served as a profound political statement, a way to claim territory, project authority, and unify identity in a form that could not be ignored or easily erased. The geoglyph became a signature written in stone, asserting control over the valleys, trade routes, and resources it overlooked. To understand this, shift your perspective from the sky to the ground of an ancient traveler. You are walking a well-worn path through a narrow valley in the Atacama Desert, your journey taking you between distant settlements. As you round a bend, the entire slope of a mountain ahead resolves into the form of a towering humanoid figure, its geometric head crowned with rays, its gaze fixed upon your approach. This is not a hidden symbol for the gods above. This is a direct address to you, the person entering this space. Its scale is overwhelming, its permanence unmistakable. The immediate, visceral message is one of presence. Someone powerful commands this place. The land itself bears their mark, announcing that you are now walking in a realm defined by their identity, under their symbolic watch. This transforms a geoglyph from a ritual site into a territorial beacon, a silent but potent form of social control that operated 24 hours a day for centuries without need of a garrison or a wall. The specific imagery chosen often reinforces this political function. While some figures represent deities or animals, others may depict stylized forms of powerful local rulers or the totemic emblems of dominant clans. In a world before written deeds or mapped borders, embedding such an emblem directly into the geography was the ultimate claim of ownership. It stated, "This valley, this mountain, this source of water is under the protection and authority of the people of the hummingbird or the spider or the condor." For allied groups or a confederation of communities, a shared geoglyph could serve the opposite but equally vital function. It could symbolize unity. Creating a monumental image that represented a collective identity, perhaps a composite creature or a shared celestial symbol, required cooperation and shared resources. The act of building it together would forge social bonds, and the resulting figure, visible to all member communities, would stand as a permanent testament to their alliance, a reminder of their shared commitment etched into their common landscape. The most compelling argument for the geoglyph as a political tool, however, lies in the sheer economics of its creation. The mountain removal technique demanded a staggering investment of labor, food, and organizational skill. Only an authority with significant reach and influence could marshal such resources. The ability to command or inspire hundreds of people to work for months on a non-utilitarian project is in itself a dazzling display of power. It demonstrated that the ruling body controlled not just land but people and time. They could redirect the community's energy from immediate survival toward a lasting monument to their own legacy. This conspicuous consumption of effort is a universal political language. Think of the pyramids of Egypt or the great cathedrals of Europe. Their construction was as much about demonstrating divine favor and temporal power as it was about worship. The geoglyph operates on the same principle, but its canvas is the natural world. By permanently altering a mountain, the authority showed it could command the very shape of the world people lived in. This made the claim unchallengeable. A wooden palisade can burn, a border stone can be moved, but a deity or a totem carved into a hillside requiring the movement of thousands of tons of earth is a claim that endures. It becomes a fact of the environment, as immutable as a river or a cliff face. For generations born after its creation, the geoglyph was not a claim to be debated. It was simply part of the world, a naturalized feature that silently reinforced the established order. The land itself taught people who was in charge and where their community's identity was rooted. In this light, the mountain removal technique emerges as a foundational political technology. It was a method for inscribing law, memory, and hierarchy directly onto the territory, making governance a visible, tangible part of daily life. The giant on the hill was always watching, a permanent sentinel whose silent message of control was written in the language of earth and stone, meant to be read by every soul who passed beneath its gaze. Yet for all we have uncovered, the desert still holds its secrets close. The mountain removal technique is understood in principle, but in practice, it remains a constellation of brilliant, unanswered questions. How, for instance, did they execute the most intricate figures with such flawless consistency? A single, continuous line defining the spiral tail of the Nazca monkey stretches for hundreds of meters without a single wobble or correction. Maintaining that perfect curvature across uneven ground, with teams working on isolated sections, suggests a level of on-site coordination and quality control we can only guess at. Were master surveyors constantly walking the lines, checking alignments against a central master chord? Or did the grid system and the skill of individual teams produce such harmony that constant oversight was unnecessary? The exact choreography of the workforce, the daily rhythm of the dig, and the precise sequence in which complex multi-part figures were assembled are lost to the wind, leaving us with the breathtaking result but not the minute-by-minute manual. Even more tantalizing are the geoglyphs we have not yet found. Our perspective has been limited by our own technology. For a century, we have searched from airplanes and satellites, but what lies beneath the dense green canopy of the Amazon or under the shifting sands of other deserts? Entire networks of earthworks could be waiting, hidden in plain sight. This is where 21st century tools are revolutionizing the search. Researchers are now deploying satellite spectroscopy, which analyzes the light reflected from the Earth to detect subtle chemical changes in the soil. A long-buried ditch, even if filled in, can affect vegetation growth and soil moisture, creating a spectral signature invisible to the naked eye but clear to sensors in orbit. This technology can peer through thin layers of sand or spot the ghostly imprint of ancient pathways beneath modern farmland, guiding ground teams to potential discoveries without a single shovel breaking the surface. Another powerful ally is artificial intelligence, trained to recognize the geometric language of geoglyphs. By feeding algorithms thousands of images of known lines and figures, scientists can program them to scan vast areas of satellite imagery, flagging patterns that human eyes might dismiss as natural erosion or modern agriculture. The AI does not get tired. It can scrutinize thousands of square kilometers with inhuman patience, searching for the telltale straight lines, circles, or animal shapes that whisper of human intention. This digital prospecting is already yielding results, with potential new sites identified in remote regions of Peru and Bolivia, each awaiting ground verification. The very soil of the geoglyphs is now telling its own story through microscopic analysis. Scientists examine the compacted layers in the trenches, searching for pollen grains, phytoliths, the microscopic silica skeletons of plants, and traces of organic matter. This can reveal what the local environment was like when the lines were built. Was it slightly wetter? Were different plants present? This data helps us understand not just how they built, but why they built at that specific moment in time. Furthermore, analyzing the patina, or desert varnish, that slowly forms on the exposed surfaces can provide clues about their age and exposure history. New techniques in luminescence dating can determine when quartz grains in the subsoil were last exposed to sunlight, potentially offering more precise dates for the construction events than we have ever had before. The story of the mountain removal technique is far from a closed book. It is a living field of inquiry, growing more vibrant with each technological leap. Every new tool, from AI to soil chemistry, offers a fresh lens, a new way to interrogate the silent earth. Each discovery answers one question and immediately poses three more, pulling us deeper into the minds of the ancient planners. This enduring mystery is precisely what keeps the topic alive. It is a collaborative puzzle spanning centuries, where the meticulous work of an archaeologist with a trowel meets the vast data-crunching power of a satellite algorithm. The conversation between humanity and these immense earthworks continues, and the next chapter may be written not in the desert, but in a lab, on a computer screen, or in the quiet hum of a sensor passing overhead, forever changing how we see the marks we left upon our world. The final image from space is not merely a photograph, it is the closing of a circle, From the vast plains of Nazca to the sloping flanks of the Atacama, the mountain removal technique stands as a testament to a vision that could only be completed by the future. We have walked the path from that first critical choice of canvas, a slope stable and contrasting, to the final symbol enduring under the sun. We have seen how simple tools of wood, stone, and woven fiber, guided by a profound understanding of geology and astronomy, were wielded not by a single genius but by a symphony of coordinated hands. These geoglyphs are far more than ancient curiosities etched into remote deserts. They are deliberate messages pressed into the very skin of the planet, a permanent language speaking of deep belief, unbreakable community, and that most human of urges to make a mark that says we were here and this is what we believed mattered. The technique itself is a mirror. It reflects a relationship with the environment that was not one of domination, but of intelligent collaboration. The builders listened to the mountain, learned its rules of wind and water, and then designed their art to work within that system, ensuring its survival became a partnership with nature itself. When we look down upon their work from satellites today, we are fulfilling the ancient intention. We are finally attaining the vantage point they imagined for their celestial audience, completing a dialogue started millennia ago. This perspective offers a powerful reminder, one that echoes across the centuries to our own complex world. The greatest human achievements often arise not from the most complex machinery, but from the simplest, most profound resources: shared purpose, meticulous observation, and unwavering collective determination. These lines in the earth challenge our modern assumptions about progress. They ask us to consider what we could build, what message we might leave, if we directed even a fraction of our own collective energy toward a vision that extends beyond our own lifetimes. The mountain removal technique is not a relic of a primitive past. It is a lesson in scale, patience, and the enduring power of a common dream. If this journey into ancient ingenuity has sparked your curiosity, there are countless other mysteries waiting where history and landscape intertwine. Consider subscribing for more deep dives into the puzzles of our shared past, and we would love to hear from you. Which of these earthbound giants, from the hummingbird to the watchful figure in the hills, captures your imagination the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below.